welcome, Shaun Tan. I keep finding your book shelved in all these weird places, so either children's books or graphic novels. And there does seem to be a disconnect between the subject matter of the work, which can be very serious, from depression and immigration, and the artwork. Is that anything that anybody tried to get you to stop doing? Like, at any point with a publisher, did they try to get you to make it look like something it's supposed to be?
No, not really. So I've been quite fortunate that way. I think early on, after I'd worked on the first couple of picture books, there was a publishing director who was trying to get me to do a book for young children, like an actual children's book, and I resisted that because I didn't feel qualified. I didn't know how kids thought. I didn't know what they wanted. I was so busy just working on my own projects, my own ideas. And my background is kind of adult science fiction. It's not children's literature. That combined with this weird fusion of adult science fiction and fine arts landscape painting. And I had a few manuscripts coming across to me, and they were like for actual kosher children's books, and I just didn't respond to them so well. I kind of wanted stuff that was closer to adult science fiction, and I never saw myself as a children's book illustrator. In fact, I still don't. And that's not to say that my work's misunderstood. I think it's fantastic that kids get something out of it, but I never think about kids when I'm working. I'll think about my own childhood a bit, but that's about as far as I go.
And, okay, so the science fiction, I read in an interview that you had written stories before that were just prose, they weren't illustrated.
That's right.
Is that what you were writing, was science fiction?
Yes, which started when I was about 15. I became very enamoured with the idea of being a science fiction short story writer, and I filled up this Lever Arch file over the next, 4 or 5 years with stories. A few of those, if I thought they were really good, I sent them away to magazines or various competitions, and I got some good feedback, but generally, because I was so young, the work was bad. And it wasn't very original either. Like, I realise that now. A lot of my ideas, I was like, wow, this is a great idea. Why hasn't anybody thought of it before? That's because they have. And I got, rejections actually, mostly at first from the US, which was where most of the science fiction magazines were. But it was kind of so exciting to get a rejection slip from the US. Wow, it's paper from another continent, with a bit of New York air in the envelope. I didn't take that seriously, I was just like, oh, well, if it gets published, fine. If it doesn't, it's just you're sort of looking for feedback. And so my pretensions were to being a writer, and I was very influenced as a teenager by Ray Bradbury, and that subconsciously starts bubbling up in Tales from Outer Suburbia without me realising it, that early influence. And not so much Ray Bradbury's novels, which I don't like, but his short stories. I thought of illustration as a boring art form, second rate. In fact, that's what I was taught at university and to some extent at high school, that illustration is a second-rate art form. It's for people who can't, for some reason, make it as gallery painters or something. They end up illustrating, which is the lowest form of visual representation. And it was only when I started to... what happened was I was writing these stories, and then I started to draw pictures, attaching them to the front of my stories, because I'd heard about these slush piles that editors have to face. And I thought, how can I make my, little wad of printed material stand out in the slush pile? I'll put a picture on the front, and I was quite good at drawing as a young person, so I would illustrate my own stories, what it kind of had the the opposite effect to what I was hoping for, in that the stories got rejected and the illustrations were accepted. And actually that's one reason why I became an illustrator, because I thought very early on, this must be what I'm supposed to be doing, because my writing sucks, but my illustrations are good. So I forgot about the writing, something that I've been practicing and going to workshops and everything for so long, and just thought if I'm going to make a living, I'm going to have to draw and paint. But I'd still like to work with text.
Do you still write stories that are just prose?
No, just because I'm out of the habit. I think if you're going to be a writer, you really have to practice all the time. And what it comes down to is a shortage of time. I can't really imagine now actually writing something without... I just have to so immerse myself back in the world of writing again, and forget about illustration for a while to do that.
Now, did you go to art school, or are you sort of self-taught?
I didn't go to art school formally. I went to a high school which had a special art program, and that was very useful because on Saturday mornings we would go to school for 3 hours, and we would have practising artists come in and tutor us. So real live artists, not art teachers, although a lot of art teachers are artists, but these were like their main job was being an artist, and some of them were ultra conservative, some of them were crazy Fruit Loops, some of them could draw well, some of them couldn't, but we got the whole variety, and almost every technical thing that I know came from those Saturday mornings. At university, I didn't actually think I could make a living as an artist, so I gave up on that early on, not even as an illustrator, and I decided that I would have to study something else. So I did an arts degree almost to delay having to make a decision, not an uncommon story. And I did all the things that weren't taught in high school, but I was interested in history and philosophy, and also I realised my two interests were fine arts and English literature, and I ended up doing joint honours in those. But that was very academic, and I thought maybe that's for me is academia, fine art academia, English literature academia, and got to the end of it and I decided that I didn't want to continue and that I wanted to spend a year working as a painter somehow. And I started off doing fantasy novel covers because, that was sending work out everywhere. I got a bite from that direction. And so I did that for a while, and that led on to other illustration work. I was doing stuff for science fiction magazines as well, and eventually to children's books where I realised there was more regular work. And so that's how I started working with children's publishers. And
so fantasy book covers, so were you painting elves and dragons?
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah?
Mm-hmm. Lots of people on horses with swords.
Excellent.
So I got pretty good at doing horses and misty landscapes. And you know how I learned how to paint fantasy novel covers? I went to my local newsagents next to the department store. This is in the outer northern suburbs of Perth, where I spent my first 23 years. And I looked at the rack, a little revolving rack. Didn't buy any of the books because I couldn't afford them, but I'd look at them and study them, and then I'd go home and, I'd make notes and just reproduce that sort of painting. And I realise now as a young person, and you can probably see from some of these slides, the style changes a lot. My initial talent was imitation. I could have made a really good living as a forger, I reckon, because I seem to have this knack of looking at someone's style and being able to replicate it. So, that's what allowed me to survive early on as a freelance illustrator.
And as someone who has such a distinct art style, then how did you go from being able to replicate somebody else's work to finding your own sort of style?
I was illustration. I always felt like a work for hire. So I divided my work into two categories. There was the illustrations I did for publications, which were like the fantasy novel covers. I really didn't care that much about them as long as I got my check and that the author was happy. I was doing it for the client entirely. Whatever they wanted, I would do. There's another part of my work which I also do, which nobody sees, and that is painting. I have no attraction to the gallery culture, so I don't exhibit my paintings. I just do them. I did them for a long time in the garage and stacked them up against a wall. And a lot of them are still stacked up against a wall in my parents' garage. And And it was all about freeing the art from any commodification so that I could focus on just achieving a good painting level. And that's where my real style was kind of forged. The difference too with that is it's direct observational painting, sitting in front of something and painting it as I saw it, and then trying to really think about what I'm looking at. Whereas illustration is partly observation, and a lot of it is out of my head. It's set in a world that's not real. And then there was this middle area, which was the science fiction illustrations, which was published work for a particular purpose, but I wasn't really being paid to do a lot of these. It was sort of like something that enthusiasts just did by getting together, and it was about half and half. So no commercial interest, but also out of my head, so something in between. And my books fall in that category. They're somewhere between commercial work and private, personal work that I don't exhibit. And increasingly, they've started shifting towards the private, personal side over the years.
You mentioned your parents, and I've heard you say before that everyone is sort of born to an artist and then they either stop or forget how to, but because of the encouragement of your parents, you continued. Did you talk a little bit about your...
Well, in response to a question people always ask is, when did you start drawing? Which is a real weird question. Like, when did any of you start drawing? Like, probably when you're about 4, you know. I think that's pretty standard. Who doesn't draw when they're a kid? When I was in primary school, there was one girl who didn't want to do art class. I never understood that, but that was the only case I ever came across. She must have had a bad early experience or something. But all kids draw instinctively, and that fascinates me in the same way that all cultures draw instinctively. And even looking back chronologically, you know, going back to cave painting and stuff like that, it's an inherent instinctive thing. Who knows why? It's really bizarre. It could be a byproduct of being an intelligent being, that you then have to do this kind of pointless activity of doing representations of things on a flat surface. But all kids do this, and my brother started drawing before me. He's now a geologist, and his drawing skills are terrible. But I would have copied what he was doing. You know, he started drawing circles. I would draw circles. He was drawing squares. I'd draw squares. And at some point, you sort of stop drawing. Not in all cultures, but generally most Western cultures. For instance, if you go to Bali, most people can draw quite well. It's like handwriting, you know, they can draw a barong or something pretty well. We're not taught it at school. It's sort of a very specialist thing. And it also, for every child, there's a point where your own drawings stop being satisfying, and I'd call that point consciousness. And when you actually don't care about what you're doing, but you care about what it looks like. And this is the problem of being an adult, is worrying about what things look like rather than the pure act of just the gesture of getting things down on the page. And I think almost every artist is trying to return as a wise older person to a childlike state, to be able to act without self-consciousness in the production of art and not worry about who's looking at it or how it's going to benefit you economically or with your reputation or whatever, and just do what kids do up until about the age of, I think it's about 8 or 9, and that is they just draw something and almost throw it away. And, you know, once they've finished the act, they're done with it. And all those drawings are, like, fantastic. You know, like, I love drawings by kids who are about 5 or 6. They're about the best. And sometimes I feel like I've got to try and compete with that, but it's difficult, you know.
Is that why the paintings are still stacked in the garage?
You know, it's just laziness. That I just don't know what to do with them, so I don't want to sell them because I like them. And that's one thing about if you're a gallery painter, is you sort of have to sell your work and then you never see it again, and it ends up in someone's home. And I'm a little bit possessive and I tend to hoard. And some of the paintings I like to go back and look at them as a diary, because I've never kept a diary, but I've kept these paintings, and they're painted in a way that I couldn't do now. You know, I was thinking a certain way and feeling a certain way, and the painting subconsciously captures that. And so I look back at some of this stuff and I was going, gee, gosh, I was really unhappy as a teenager there. But at the time I didn't know it because I was just thinking I was painting a tree, and that was it. So, it's kind of like... also, I'm hoping their investment value will increase a little bit. I had the experience of selling some illustrations from the rabbits way too early just to try and flog them off for cash, and they're worth like 10 times now what I sold them for, because I didn't have much regard for my own work at that time.
And you mentioned hoarding, and there is that sort of magpie aspect to a lot of your illustration, in this book particular, of little bits and pieces from different things, like collage work and that sort of stuff. Mm-hmm. Is that what your home looks like too, that sort of hoarding pack rat?
Both myself and my wife are the same, which is bad. You know, you need one person in a relationship to be corrective, and it's not happening with us. So our house looks like, I mean, there's two kinds of houses. There's like the modern art museum or the antique shop, you know, and ours is like the antique shop. Someone asked me if I'm a very perceptive person in a thing like this. They asked me, do I keep a box of bits? And I was like, yes, indeed, I keep a box of bits. It's just a big box under my table. And if I find an interesting stamp or a bus ticket or a scrap of paper or a funny combination of words, I just tear it out and put it in the box. And when it comes to doing artwork, I like to use collage because it's a way of getting into a picture by breaking up the surface and introducing random elements that have nothing to do with me personally. So you're always trying to get stuff that's not you into the work to get you to respond rather than express. And so I have a box full of junk like that, and a lot of it I'm sure is going to end up in hard rubbish collection at some point. But for the time being, just in case, I better keep it on standby.
In case somebody has a mad cleaning spree. Now, these are kind of short stories. This is a little bit of a collection. Were they sort of envisioned as a whole piece, or were they written over a larger span of time?
They were written over a large span of time, and it kind of first a bit randomly and then with a slightly more purpose in mind. Some of them weren't intended for a collection, so there's a story there about how you can make yourself a pet from hard rubbish collections from your neighbours. And that was originally produced as a free artwork for the RSPCA to raise money, using the idea of adopting a second-hand animal, and almost all my family's pets have been second-hand animals, but using the metaphor of an animal made out of garbage that can still be valuable to somebody. So that's the oldest piece in the book, and that was always sitting around. I did it in full colour, and it was reproduced black and white in a fairly obscure publication. I thought, I really like this, and I must try and find a way of getting it published in a way that better represents it. And going through my sketchbooks, I realised there were a lot of aborted picture books because the ideas were too slight. An average picture book is 32 pages long, and some of these would only be 1 or 2 pages, but I really like them. They're not even stories, they're like beginnings, middles or endings without the other bits to complicate things, almost like the way, when you watch a preview to a film, it's often better than the actual film, sadly. And it's free, that's the other thing, rather than wasting $15 on something you got tricked into seeing. Is
that a recent experience? There's a little bit of
I'm still angry about it. No, it really bothers me that, if I had my way, I'd just sit down and watch 2 hours of previews and go, that'd be fantastic. But I like that idea. I don't see enough work like that. I see it a bit, but it's not common. There's a tendency for publishers to not really go for anthologies so much, although I think that's changing. I've noticed a lot around that are doing quite well, both for audience and critically. And, so others I just did random stories. I didn't worry about how they related to each other, but over time, because they're all coming, I guess, from the same person, they're bound to have similarities. And I realised that they were all set in a suburban environment, I think because I was thinking about my childhood a lot when I was working on this book, and so I thought, okay, well, maybe that's a theme I can work on. And I toyed with the idea that they were all in precisely the same universe, the same world. And I was thinking a bit like Under Milkwood, and the idea of, going in and sort of a particular village or place, but seeing snapshots. And then I thought, well, forget about that. I'll keep it fairly random. I'll change styles. I'll just treat it as if it was that early science fiction magazine work that I used to do, where all the stories were different, all the frontispieces were different, and just put it together and see what people think. It's a very honest response to my sketchbook, not trying to hammer it into a particular shape, just to leave it as is and keep the ideas as pure as possible.
And are you one of the writers who doesn't like to talk about what they're working on now, or can you share something about?
A little bit. I don't like talking about what I'm working on now, only because I'm not sure what it is. It's something, but it's something to do with close relationships with another person, and I'm still trying to figure out that. But in some ways, like a story in this, which lingers with me a lot, one called Grandpa's Story, which was a story I felt least confident about at first, but it's the one that kind of I think about the most now. Just about a couple getting married and going through this surreal desert experience before they can be pronounced man and wife. And I was married not so long ago, so maybe that's why I'm thinking about it a lot. The perils of the desert. And, how you have to stick together and, fight all these weird obstacles that are unanticipated. So something like that. I mean, right at the moment, I'm working on a short animated film, and there's some shots, they're not obviously up here, that would be too coincidental, but the ones that look a bit like a computer-generated imagery, they're stills from a 15-minute film adaptation of The Lost Thing, and that's kind of a by turns exciting and tedious project to be working on, but that's true of almost everything I've done, exciting and tedious. The ideas are exciting, the actual work is hard, but that's due to be finished at the end of this year and likely to come out mid-next year, and that's looking quite good. It's a fairly faithful adaptation of that book, which I'm directing, so with other adaptations I've sort of just said, do whatever you want, but with this one I was like, I really want to be involved, and these relate to the film. These are concept drawings for that film.
And so what is your involvement with it? Are you doing the actual animation, the artwork for it?
No, I can't animate, and I don't work with computers very often, but I did all the storyboarding, I wrote the script, I did the concept art, and the design. So these are all then modelled as three-dimensional characters, and you'll see different versions popping up here. And then basically sitting down with the animator and going through everything bit by bit, sitting down with the lighting guy, sitting down with the modelling guy, and just overseeing every detail and commenting on it. And it's great because when a project is working, it's not like you're telling other people what to do. You're just trying to get you're tuned into the same frequency. So the project gets easier as it goes on because everybody knows the world. And the thing about the world of The Lost Thing is it's fairly simple, and the ideas in it are weird, but they're also obvious. A lot of things that happen in it are quite obvious. And ultimately, whether you're working alone or collaboratively, you're always working alone creatively. Like, there's this saying, no great idea came from a big room. And in the same way that, IQ is inversely proportional to the size of a committee. So basically everybody comes together, but you work separately on the same frequency, and then check and go away and work and then come back and check. And so it's been like that since 2002 actually. So it's been going for a long time, but the project stalled for a number of reasons, but now it's all happening. So,
is it something you're enjoying? Would you do it again?
I'd do it again only because I'm sure the next time wouldn't be as hard as it has been this time. I've learnt a lot from the process, and I think the team that we sort of have now, it's a very small team, and we sort of understand each other more, and so if we did do another film, it would probably be a much smoother, well lubricated process. But it's just been a difficult one. If it was exactly the same as it has been, I would say no, actually. It's too much work. I'd rather be off doing books, to be honest.
How much time has it actually taken during, that giant span of years, 7 years? How much?
I think if I compress it all into full-time work, it might be about 2 or 3 years. I was working on The Arrival in a lot of that time, so that obviously absorbed my time, as well as Tales from Outer Suburbia, but scattered in between was these, working with the film crew and just getting all that together. But I think if we did it again, it would be much quicker.